You know how to book flights and hotels. All you're missing is a tool to plan the travel experiences you'll have once you arrive. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, excursions, and more in one place. There are over 300,000 travel experiences to choose from, so you can find something for everyone. And Viator offers free cancellation and 24/7 customer support for worry-free travel. Download the Viator app now and use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Find travel experiences for you. Do more with Viator.
Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there, because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Today, we're talking about change. And in this series, we're talking about change in every episode right now. But on this episode, I wanted to take a chance to just have a little conversation with you, myself, about change. We're going to talk about coping with change. We're going to talk about why change is something we must face, both good and bad. And we're going to talk about some of the things that I've learned along the way that have helped me. And I would really love to hear from each of you after you hear this episode about anything that you would add from your own perspective. I'd love for this to be an episode that you share with a friend, maybe that's walking through change, or a family member as you're walking through change together, as a way to help you have a conversation with your friends and family and loved ones about change itself. And I would love to hear back from you on your perspective and your thoughts around change. I also, before I did this episode, I was having dinner with my family, and I asked my oldest son to tell me what he thought about change. So I'm going to be sharing that in a little bit, because he had some great insights. But first off, I just want to read a couple of quotes around change. There's a Spanish proverb that says, "A wise man changes his mind. A fool never will." Maya Angelou, the famous poet, said, "If you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude." And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. How can we change our attitude about change? It's definitely something that comes our way on a daily basis in small ways, and then in our lifetime in big ways over and over again. When we think about it, welcome change isn't so much the part we struggle with, is it? You know, I welcomed the change of welcoming into our home each of our 3 children. I have to admit, I was not super thrilled about the fact that I was expecting twins, because that felt a little bit of an overwhelming change. And I think every pregnancy has its own feeling of overwhelm. But it turns out that change that was brought into our family has been such a wonderful blessing. Each of our children, you know, I was not one of those people who ever wanted to get married. I really just was a very self-sufficient, independent person who didn't feel like I needed to be married to do the things and have the life I wanted to have. But the welcome change that came into my life was I met my husband, Jason, when we were in college. And suddenly I realized that was a change that I wanted. Um, well, it had a lot of fear in terms of what that was going to mean. I think many people go through that as you're trying to figure out, is this a person I want to spend the rest of my life with? That wasn't the hard part for me. It was mostly just, the idea of for the rest of your life being tied to the decision making with this particular person. But it turns out that change in my life has been one of the best decisions I ever made. And it continues to contribute to my flourishing and the flourishing of others that we know together as a couple because of the ways we've lived life together in ways that I'm fully convinced are better than I would have done on my own. And as a person who really appreciates, teamwork and the opinions of others, many people throughout my life, especially my husband, have helped me walk through changes that were difficult. And we're going to spend a little time with an exclusive interview that I'll do with each of you who are our patrons, the Patreon supporters, where I'll dig into a little more in a personal way how I coped through some of the biggest change that happened in my life. But for the purpose of this episode, we're just going to walk through kind of at a high level different thoughts that I have around change and how I have navigated those. As many of you know, I'm a third culture kid, which means change was something that was a part of my life growing up quite a bit. Moving to new schools, I was in Costa Rica for part of my early, schooling in elementary school. And then when I was still in elementary school, I moved to Venezuela and I was in international school there. Anytime you grow up in international school, change is constant because people are constantly moving in and out for expat jobs in some places really last for just 2 years, especially military families are often moving out and in every 2 years or so. And then, the missionary families are going on furloughs anywhere between 2 and 4 years at a time and then coming back again, that kind of thing. And so change in terms of my friendships was, happening quite often, although I feel very blessed that I have had some friends that I've had ever since fifth grade when I first moved to Venezuela that are still people I consider friends. So change has been a part of my life for sure. So I had to, at a young age, learn what it meant to walk through change. And I picked up a few things along the way. And I would say in my career, I've had to learn a lot about change management and different leadership styles. Organizations do things, in their own unique way. Every culture has a different way. Every work culture, every organizational culture has a different way of handling change, and it has to be managed well. We all have been in situations where a change just kind of happened from the top down and it was very centralized and it was not sort of socialized, or as our Indonesian friends would say, you have to socialisasi something. You have to kind of have conversations before big changes roll out so that it kind of doesn't hit people as so difficult. And then often thinking about how change rolls out in an organization, if it's not welcome, is especially fragile and challenging and can really affect the morale of an organization. Case in point, here in Silicon Valley, many tech companies have made announcements that, people are coming back to the office, and it may be a certain amount of days per week, 2 days per week, or for some people, when it kind of rolled out earlier on for people with more hands-on positions in manufacturing or engineering, it happened earlier than it did for others. But all of that can feel kind of sudden if it's not been expected. And so I'm going to talk about 5 different ways I have found that change is something we can cope with when it's not easy to handle. And I think, change, like we said, is an important thing that we walk through. It's not insignificant in any way, but it's also just an inevitable part of life. It can be challenging, though, to cope with at times. And so here's some strategies that may help you cope with change, and I offer them to you. And once again, would love to hear what has been helpful in your life that you've discovered. Number 1, I would say we have to pay attention to our emotions. And that's something that has been not the easiest for me. I'm a strong T on the Myers-Briggs. So I'm more of a thinker, but it doesn't mean I don't have feelings. I certainly do. And I'm a very empathetic person, and I really care about my friends and family in a very deep way. But it can sometimes be hard to recognize emotions. And so I've learned some tools earlier in my life that sort of help me walk through that. And, in the last several years for sure, have had a therapist help me kind of understand how we can have a range of emotions around change. That could be everything from excitement to anxiety, sadness, fear. And, really digging deep into those things is what can help us recognize this is what's going on. And I would say recognizing emotions for me particularly meant paying attention to my body and what my body was saying to me. And that's not something I was really raised to understand. I was definitely, I think many of us probably are in that category that you just sort of make decisions with your brain, and then you're just being very logical about things. And I'll bring up here what my oldest son, who is a real brainiac, he's studying aerospace engineering and getting straight A's in college, and he's just a really smart dude, very very knowledgeable, and has just been a collector of knowledge really since he was a baby. He just has this uncanny way of just remembering things, and learned his alphabet early, and all the things. Like he's one of those. His brain just absorbs a lot of information. And so when I asked him, what are your tips around handling change? He's been writing a research paper somewhat along these lines for his English class in college this semester. And so he's had that kind of on his mind as he's been doing some of the research. And he said, it's important to rationalize it, right? And to think about all the facts around it and research it, and get as close to understanding the change as you can and figuring out how it affects you. But he said it's also can be really harmful if you start to change your identity around that change, so that we don't want to automatically jump into I am this kind of person, therefore, because of this change, but you wanted to be more thoughtful about it. So, I mean, he's an Enneagram 5, and I know Enneagram 5s are just very much withdraw in their thoughts, and that's how he is. And so I found that very insightful. So on the one hand, we want to recognize our emotions, but we also want to be thoughtful about those emotions by using our brain to recognize them, right? And it's important to acknowledge and just validate your own feelings. Allow yourself to feel through them with a lot of self-compassion and with curiosity instead of judgment. And that can be hard for some of us, especially certain personality types. I'm thinking of 2s and 3s, I've known 4s even sometimes, that can be really hard on yourselves. And I tend to say, if you are the kind of person that really is struggling with self-compassion around how you feel about change, I would just invite you to stay curious about that. And it's in feeling through it sometimes that we can get to the other side and really embrace the change. The second one I would say is to focus on the parts of the change that you can control. There's so much within our process around change that's out of our control, and that can feel very helpless and frustrating. I remember when I was 15 and my mom was pregnant with my younger brother and had to be medevaced out of Venezuela, and I was a freshman in my international school, and life was just good. I just joined the volleyball team, or just been invited to join the volleyball team, and we were going to be playing with other international schools. I was doing really well in my French class and loved it. I had, great friends, and was about to go on beach retreat with the other TCKs that I knew at this beach house in Cata Beach. And all of a sudden I found that I was going to be having to go to the United States for a particular unknown amount of time to help with what was happening with my mom and my younger brother because of that dangerous situation. And I don't know, I have twin 15-year-olds right now, and I just, that's not the easiest time to be thinking about how big change is affecting others. That level of the teenage years is mostly focused on how it affects you. But my parents were very kind and sent me to a therapist, and I only met with her once, but I remember very clearly what she said to me is, you have two choices around this change. Do you know what they are? And even at 15, I was like, yeah, we can do the easy way or the hard way. And that sort of just stuck with me until now. I just realized there's a lot I can't control about the situation. But I did start to focus on the things I could control. And that's really just been great advice for me. Change can often make us feel so out of control, but when we start to, work in the areas of our circle of control, such as how we react, how we respond, our attitude. We can start to take action and make plans, make strategic moves where we can, instead of feeling helpless, overwhelmed, and trapped. That feeling of being trapped is a horrible feeling. And I know, especially for those Enneagram 7s out there, which is my wing. I'm an 8 with a wing 7. Feeling trapped is just like a horrible feeling for 7s. And so focusing on what you can control can really change how you handle change itself. The third thing I would say is staying flexible and adaptable. Certain personality types are, find this easier than others. But one of the key things about coping with change really is this, and to stay open-minded, embracing new opportunities instead of resisting them, staying curious about new opportunities. As a lot of times we react emotionally something new that's brought our way because of fear or not understanding it. And we're often afraid of what we don't understand and what the outcomes could be. But if we can have a posture of being flexible and adaptable, often we find that some of those moments that we can take a risk have actually been some of the times in our lives where we stepped into some of the most beautiful parts of our lives. For me, like, for example, getting married and having children, those were really scary things for me. They weren't parts of my plan. But when I became more flexible and adaptable about opening up my heart to those things, they are some of the best things in my life that I would never want to have said no to. The fourth thing I would say is it's really important to have a practice of caring for yourself. So practicing self-care when change happens. I know that when my twins were born, I had been on a couple of months of bed rest, and then I had a 3-year-old at the time who was curious and wild and just learning and smart and like wanting to examine everything in the house like a little scientist all the time. And so it was a bit stressful to add 2 more babies and all the diapers and all the things going on. And I had, my husband was working on his marriage and family therapy master's degree at that time. And somebody that was in his classes with him offered to get together to like just give me basically free therapy because she needed to get sort of counseling hours, right, for the degree, for the licensure track she and my husband were in. And so I remember her saying, as a mom with 3 very little ones, you're going to need to really focus on self-care. And I didn't know how to embrace that because, definitely change had come into my life and a double blessing, but also it brought a lot of exhaustion and stress. And so she was just very clear that, and it was good advice, but it was hard to receive because all I was thinking about was caring for these 2 little ones and then my 3-year-old. But she said, your body itself is their sustenance. I was, breastfeeding both of them and trying to be the full amount of nutrition for these 2 babies as I was nursing them at every couple of hours, And so she just said, practicing self-care is so important. And that has been something over and over again that I've had to work on. I know many moms do. We have a narrative in our cultures, many of them, that expects mothers to just constantly give and give and give to everyone, not only in their own family, but in the neighborhood, in the community, at the PTA, in our churches, our faith-based spaces, and just volunteer for free. And so that can be really hard, especially for moms, to practice self-care. But when we have change come into our life, it's really, really important. And so here I am preaching to you about this because someone preached to me about it and I have to preach this sermon to myself too. It's so important to practice and prioritize self-care, especially in times of transition. So if you're about to make a big move across the world, or you're taking an expat assignment for the first time, or you're repatriating back home, if you're sending your child off to college, if you're just getting married, if you're expecting a child and about to go through motherhood for the first time, or have just given birth, any of these times of transition, it's just so, so important to make sure you kind of don't fill your schedule in ways that make it hard for you to practice self-care. So getting enough rest, even if you have to get an app on your phone, a health app that reminds you it's time for bed. Thank you, iPhone. And to all of you who work on that, who might be listening, all my friends here in Cupertino and here that are working on the iPhone, we thank you for this app, this health app that, that reminds us to go to bed. Make sure you eat well, eat healthy meals, get your vegetables. Make sure you exercise. And in fact, if you can, grab a friend or your kid or your neighbor or your spouse and, do a walk around the neighborhood. Sometimes processing the transition can be a bit traumatic. And so the bilateral movement of taking a left step and a right step actually mimics the EMDR therapy that we can do for trauma. And so my husband and I, when we went through a really traumatic situation a couple of years ago, just did a lot of walking in our neighborhood. And it was the bilateral movement and taking steps together that helped our brains actually process that trauma. But in addition, we got exercise. So it's really important to keep exercising and get some fresh air, get some vitamin D. And to practice mindfulness or meditation, maybe you call it a quiet time, maybe you call it your prayer time or a time you read scripture in the morning or at night or at your lunch break, whatever it is, it's just to practice a time of, thinking and allowing your mind and your spirit to be open to receiving. And mindfulness is a really hard one for me. My therapist early on, when I went through a challenging situation a couple of years ago with what happened at our church here in Silicon Valley with spiritual abuse, my therapist that I was working on with DBT really said, mindfulness is something you really should consider to put into your life. And I found it really hard to do that. I even have an app on Waze on my phone, the setting for headspace for mindfulness. And my kids always laugh at it because it sounds so cheesy. It's like, feel your body in the seat of the car. And talks about the journey and not the destination. So my kids always laugh at me, but I need those reminders because if not, my personality is just very action oriented and I want to get things done. And so pausing to be mindful and, ask myself, how do my toes feel right now? Is it cold in here? Just paying attention to my body as, a way of grounding me is not easy. If you find this easy, I would love tips on how this is working for you. So definitely reach out with those. But I've found it very challenging to walk through this type of self-care. But I highly recommend it because it is helpful, especially for, how walking through transition can feel overwhelming. I know that one transition we went through was a very unexpected one a few years ago when we were leaving Singapore. And I remember the day I found out something had changed drastically in our situation there, and we were probably going to have to consider something different potentially. And I just felt like the floor fell out from underneath me. I felt like I was sort of on this spinning ball and kind of standing on it, and I couldn't figure out which way was north. It was very, it can be a lot of disillusionment in times of transition where everything has been so stable and you love what life is like, but then suddenly this change seems like it's coming, and that is not always welcome. So this is an area where mindfulness can really help as you practice self-care. And lastly, I would say number 5 is seek whatever support you can. Change can make us feel isolated and alone, but make sure that people that care for you, that you have ways to reach out, like maybe just text somebody or send a WhatsApp to somebody across the world, or, start a little group on Twitter with just the particular people. What are those circles? I think that, people that you kind of care that are more close to you, or maybe start your own little, Facebook group or that's private, some way of just checking in during when a transition or time of change is really hard, because it's so easy to feel isolated. It's so easy to, especially if you're moving or if you have a situation where you live somewhere and a lot of other people are moving, it can be easy to start pulling away. This is something we learned as TCKs growing up, that even international schools that my 3 kids were in as TCKs, we would often talk about, is that when somebody's about to move, you start to pull away emotionally in your heart, both the person who's moving and the friends that are being left behind. And so everybody can start to feel isolated in that situation. And so it's really important to seek support from others and to continue to give your heart to the relationships you have. I mean, thank God for technology where we can stay in touch these days. Social media for all its evils, is a way to still be in touch, right? And so different from back in the day when we had to write aerograms and wait, 2 weeks till they would get to someone, and then after they got it, then they would write theirs, and it would take 2 weeks to get back. So it was like a month. And I think I've mentioned this before on this podcast, but my husband and I, even in the 90s, when we were dating, and I was in Indonesia one summer and he was in the Philippines, he was writing me almost every day aerograms, and they were coming to the address of the family where they were sort of my host family. And so, yeah, we're that old that we were writing aerograms. But it's important to seek support from others during our times of change. And this may include just, talking to a trusted friend or family member. Joining a support group is also really helpful. And these can be online on Zoom. I'm in a sort of support group type thing right now for 9 months. We're in month 8. My husband's in one group with guys and I'm in a group with women, and it's through this center in Puerto Rico called Caneo. Highly recommend it. Dan White Jr. and his wife Tanya are a part of starting this, and it's for people who've walked through spiritually abusive and toxic situations. And we read an article every week. Some of them have been articles written, by Chuck DeGroat and different people that are experts on how to walk through this process of healing from spiritual abuse. And every week we read an article and we interact with it and through our writing with each other in our little group. My group has a WhatsApp group and a Facebook private group. And then we meet on Zoom once a week. And our leader of our group is a therapist, and she's wonderful. She has us do a lot of mindfulness. She'll read prayers over us, and we interact with these articles. And then it's going to end in a retreat in Puerto Rico next month, which I'm very excited to meet everyone in person for the first time. But support groups like this, or maybe you've come out of a cult recently, and so joining a support group for people who've been, in a cult before, that's a huge change, where you're trying to come out of some of that gaslighting and trying to figure out how they had told you things maybe that all the other groups out there weren't as good as theirs. And so you're learning to find there are other groups out there that are good. And so that kind of a support group is really helpful. Maybe the change in your life is that you've recently walked through divorce. And so joining a divorce care group. I have a great friend here in Silicon Valley in Fremont who runs a divorce care group at her church in Fremont. And she's just a wonderful person and has really been able to help a lot of people through this kind of support. But it's a significant change. If you've walked through any type of abuse or domestic violence, joining groups where you can get support and this kind of change of trying to pick up the pieces of your life and find hope again is really, it's a huge thing to walk through, and you really do need support. So I would say in the realm of support is also seeking professional help from a therapist or a counselor. I just really want us to normalize therapy. If that's not a normal thing for you, I want to help you normalize it, that, we are bodies, we are flesh, right? And we go to the doctor if we have diabetes and we get our insulin, right? Or if we need surgery, we have a tumor and we want that taken out in one of our organs of our body. If our heart, which is an organ, stops working well, we need to get quadruple bypass from the surgeon that knows how to do surgery on our hearts. And the brain is also an organ, and therapists are taught how to help us with talk therapy or with DBT, all these different types of therapy, that our brains and our bodies, our souls, they're all connected. But therapists are, have specialties in how to help us walk through change. This is something they do on a regular basis and are experts in. So all 5 of us in my family, my husband and I, and all 3 of our kids have all done therapy for years because we're always dealing with change. If you change the oil in your car, is that scary? No. Well, maybe it is. I don't know if you do it yourself, or maybe you're worried about getting ripped off, especially as a woman at the mechanic. I've totally been there. But that kind of change is generally just, it feels normal, right? To change the oil in your car. But also, if you go to get your car's oil changed and you want that tune up, it's not when it's broken. You just need to maintain it. And so therapy can be a way of maintaining our lives, or helping us take risks, helping us walk through all the things that life brings. So yes, remember though that coping with change is not an overnight thing. It's a journey. It's a process. It takes time. It takes effort on our part, intentionality to adjust to the new situations in our lives, both good and bad. And I just want to ask you to be patient with yourself and remember that you are capable of adapting and thriving and flourishing in the face of all kinds of change, whether it's hard change, big change, little change, good change, welcome change. You have what you need. And one of the things that's been probably super helpful in big changes, whether it's change I needed to implement as a leader in an organization, or it's change in my own life where we were trying to get to a particular place and we had a dream or a vision, goals, and we weren't quite there yet. And just having a strategic posture toward what might come our way that we wanted to be available for. When change is on the horizon and you see it coming or you see that it's needed, often just like shrinking the change down to small bite sizes can be really helpful. So, I do not like to clean my house. I never have. Even as a child, that's not something I find therapeutic. I would never be a Marie Kondo, although I'm very relieved that even Marie Kondo is sort of learning that it's okay to relax. Good for her. I mean, when children come into your life, they're just really messy, even teenagers. I feel like my kids were better, at least no particular names, but one particular kid was much cleaner when they were younger. And now that they're a teenager, it's a little more, it's not as cool to want to be like mom and dad, like when they're little and they want to do chores. So I feel like in some ways it's a little messier than it's ever been, especially during COVID and that year and a half of online school, right? Gen Z has really handled a lot of change. We should be going to them and asking them how they handled it, because they've had to go to online school and then they've had to go back to in person with masks on and all these different changes in their lives at such a young age. But I would say, one of the things that has been somewhat helpful is when I think about cleaning my whole house all at once, it's overwhelming. I think even if you love cleaning, that can feel overwhelming. But to say, there's advice out there to set a timer for 5 minutes. I've done this with my children too, like just do 5 minutes. And sometimes that's all you do. But occasionally you're like, you know what? That felt really good. I can tell what I did in 5 minutes. And then, an hour later, you've cleaned up a lot. Or if your house is small, maybe your whole house. So yeah, shrinking the change is another way to help it just have bite size. And then you take one step and the next step and just sort of, scaffold it down a little bit, because big change is overwhelming for most of us, even if it's welcome, like planning a wedding. You have to take it in small chunks and eventually it all comes together. So this is my offering to you around change. I would love to hear your thoughts, though. Really would love to hear how you have coped with change. And if you have any thoughts that you would be willing to share with everyone, I mean, you can, of course, just DM me on Twitter and say, here's my thoughts around change. But if you would like to be a part of a community, we have a Patreon community where I would love to discuss this. So please jump on in there. You can join for as little as $5 a month. And I'm going to be releasing an exclusive episode around this concept of change by talking a little more deeply about a personal issue around change that was a very unwelcome and difficult, probably one of the most difficult changes that I've had to walk through, and sort of give how that went for me and what steps I took, particularly around that situation, that helped me to be able to cope with that change and ultimately be where I am now, which is having walked through a lot of healing and flourishing and all of that. So yes, I would love to have you. You are absolutely welcome in our Patreon community. There's some great people in there, and I'd love to have a great discussion around change if you'd like to hop in. So yes, otherwise you can also just start the conversation over on Twitter if you're there, or in our Facebook group. I'm not as often in our Facebook group because Facebook has still taken over my Facebook page and commandeered that for a while. And it's just really hard to get it back because of all of their steps. It apparently happens to other podcast hosts on occasion too. So that's why we're a little more into our Patreon community right now. So I'd love to have you over there. And I'd love to give you some of the free merch that's there. If you stick with us for a little bit, you have options to get all kinds of fun stuff like mugs and t-shirts and tote bags and different things. So, and that Patreon community is also something that it means a lot to me because it helps me produce this podcast for you. And I really enjoy doing it. And I enjoy this community. You are such a bright spot in my week. I really enjoy each of you who listen. Shout out to the people last week who engaged with me on Twitter to let me know you really enjoyed last week's episode about the Samaritan woman. And even listened to it twice. I saw someone say that on Twitter, and shared it with people, and we're trying to talk to others about it in different ways. So I would love for this to be a podcast that you share with people around you as you're walking through change to help start conversations, and would love to know how it's going. This community is for you. And it really blesses me incredibly to have you in this community with us. So thank you for all the changes you're bringing around the world, the changes you're bringing into my life and into the life of others. And I just want to wish you all the very best as you continue to walk through change wherever you are in the world. All right, let us know how you're doing and how change is happening for you. And we'll talk again next week. Bye, everyone. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/aworldofdifference.
You know how to book flights and hotels. All you're missing is a tool to plan the travel experiences you'll have once you arrive. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, excursions, and more in one place. There are over 300,000 travel experiences to choose from, so you can find something for everyone. And Viator offers free cancellation and 24/7 customer support for worry-free travel. Download the Viator app now and use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Find travel experiences for you. Do more with Viator.